Jonathan, great to see you. Thank you so very much for joining me. I am Dan Steinler. I'm the owner and founder of CCR Search. We are an executive search company focused on finding sales, marketing, accounting, and finance, and construction talent for our clients. Really excited to have Jonathan Summers with me today. We're covering the topic of opportunities in the world of professional sports. Jonathan serves as the Vice President of Esports Operations at the Cleveland Cavaliers. He's been with the organization for over 6 years in a variety of roles, including digital partnerships, corporate strategy, and esports operations. The Cleveland Cavaliers employ a professional esports team in the NBA 2K League Cavs Legion GC, which is what Jonathan oversees. And in addition, the Cavaliers own and operate the Cavs Legion Lair, which is an esports and gaming facility located minutes from downtown Cleveland. Prior to joining the Cavaliers, Jonathan spent 15 years in digital media and partnerships, notably leading sales and partnership efforts at ESPN Deportes and Twitter, both out of the Chicago office. And today he resides in Cleveland, Ohio, with his wonderful wife and 2 boys. Jonathan, it is a real pleasure to have you join my podcast today. Thanks for hopping on. And I will pass to you. I'd love for you to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and what you're doing with the Cavaliers.
Absolutely, Dan. Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it. As mentioned, I am the Vice President of Esports Operations and Cavs Legion GC at the Cleveland Cavaliers. And as you alluded to, we have really 2 main buckets within our esports operations. One is our professional team. And for many people who are unaware of esports, or maybe you're hearing about it for the first time, or you've heard the buzzwords, it is competitive professional video game play. And so for us, we have a team in the NBA 2K League. And the NBA 2K League is the 4th league of the NBA. It's the esports arm of the NBA. So people think of the NBA, but in addition to the NBA, there's the WNBA, there's the G League, and now there's the NBA 2K League. Season 6 will be kicking off in the spring. So just like the NBA has 4 leagues, we have 4 properties here in Cleveland. We have the Cleveland Cavaliers, we have the Cleveland Monsters, a minor league AHL affiliate of the Columbus Blue Jackets. We have the Cleveland Charge, which is our G League affiliate of the Cavaliers. And we have Cavs Legion GC, our professional NBA 2K League team. So it's 5-on-5 competitive gameplay in the video game NBA 2K, where our players play the Lakers, they play the Knicks, they play the Pacers as standard archetypes within the game. It's a 6-month season from about March till Labor Day. And so we draft and trade for players, and they move to Cleveland, and we put them up in apartments and house them here. And they compete both remotely and in person in New York and Washington and Philadelphia and other third-party sites against those other NBA teams. And then the season concludes, as I mentioned, around Labor Day, and we break for the off season. But there's just a ton more that goes into it. It's a professional organization all the way around. We have corporate partnerships. We do community work. PR and communications obviously is vitally important for us. Everything that we do with our Cavs Monsters in Charge, we try to do the same and treat the Legion as such. So when you combine that with what we do at our facility, in terms of that being an esports facility that we use for our team, but then also for public use and private rental, and how we use that to engage the community of Cleveland in terms of gaming for good and charity gaming and high school and college gaming and fundraisers and STEM and IT, and the list goes on and on and on. But it really has opened up a whole new platform for us organizationally to reach and engage people, youth especially, because as we know, kids love video games. So it's a great way to reach those kids, and it's a great platform for the Cavaliers organization. So there's a lot that goes on beyond just playing around on a controller, I can tell you that much.
Right. So tell me a little bit about so you recruit players like that are playing the video games, and you'll trade the Lakers for an individual is playing the video games, and that advances the Cavaliers esports?
Yeah. So if you think of it just like you were to say, think of an NBA franchise, when you want to be in the NBA coming out of college, you go to a combine and all the players play against one another, and the NBA teams scout them in person, and then they conduct a draft, right? The same thing happens in our world. If you want to be in the NBA 2K League, you try out online, they find the best players, they put all the best players in a virtual area together, and they all play one another. And then our organization, we watch and scout these games. And we have an individual, Joel Azu, who leads our basketball operations, who's a former player in the league. He's our GM and coach. And yes, there's a draft that occurs annually. The next one's coming up in January. There's trades. We've conducted, I want to say 3 trades now, just this offseason alone. We've probably done a dozen trades in our 5+ year history of the organization. So it is real life. I mean, this is the real deal. It's a profession. This is individuals' careers. There's a lot of potential money on the line. And this is really the new wave of entertainment.
Huh. And I mean, do you go as far as relocating individuals, or do they stay in LA, but now they play for the Cavs?
No, absolutely. If you play for the Cavaliers, you move to Cleveland for 6 months. So similar to if you think of, say, a Cleveland Charge G League player, right, who's trying to make it to the NBA and advance their career, obviously they're going to reside in the hometown of the club that they play for. That's just how professional sports is. So I know it is different for a lot of people to wrap their head around sometimes, but if you just take the esports part out, you just think of it like a normal sport, you'd say, of course, the athlete goes to the town where the team is. And so it is really no different than traditional sports. It's just different in many other ways, let's say.
Interesting. So I think it's such an interesting conversation to have with you, because first off, we want to know how did you get into the Cavs, and how did you fall into sports? And I think what a lot of people don't realize, and I know I didn't at first, is, hey, these organizations don't have they're not large organizations. The total employees of the Cavs is maybe 300 people. And then of course you have the sports, and then you have, the different segments like esports. And so it's very competitive and hard to get into. So how do individuals get into, being an esports player? And then also, how did you become, working for the Cavs and establish your sports background, but on the business side?
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, the sports industry just in general is obviously a very popular one. Many people are interested in working in the sports industry, whether it's in sports media, for sports properties, teams, what have you. I'm very fortunate to work for the Cavaliers, in the city that I grew up in. So it's a dream come true for me. For me, I didn't start off at the organization working in esports. In fact, we didn't even have esports operations at the time I worked at the organization. We started our esports initiatives about 6 months in. And simultaneously, at 6 months after I started, not only did the NBA 2K League come about and we raised our hand to be one of the inaugural teams, but also at an ownership level, our governor, Dan Gilbert, invested and was the primary investor in 100 Thieves, which is one of the largest esports organizations in the United States and world, which is based out of Los Angeles. So we don't own and operate 100 Thieves. They're their own entity, but, we're very close with them. We have a close relationship with them across the board in many ways. So esports overall started after I joined the organization. So I was fortunate from a timing perspective in many ways to kind of, catch that wave as it took about 5+ years ago. And frankly, I didn't even know what anything was in esports. I had vaguely heard of it. I didn't grow up as a pro gamer or an avid gamer, anything of that nature. But as I was alluding to earlier, the ability of gaming to reach everybody, big and small and any gender, any race, and you name it, just gives us such a great platform. So that's where I dove headfirst into it. But to get back to your question really about breaking into the industry and how I broke in and how others can break into the industry. When I joined the Cavaliers, I came in under the role of digital partnerships, in essence, elevating our commercialization of our digital properties, our app, our website, and our social media. That was my background prior to the Cavaliers at iHeartMedia and Twitter and ESPN was, monetizing and creating and selling digital partnerships and media. So in the sports world, traditionally, partnerships have been about, radio ads and TV ads and, billboard signs and things of that nature, which all still exist and all are still incredibly powerful. But as we all know and assume, more and more of the partnerships world and media world moves into digital. And so more partners want to be in that space. So I was brought to the organization initially to help grow that space and kind of reshape that. So I was working on that, and then the esports came along, and then, some strategy work. And, as you mentioned, I've had various roles, but so for me, that was my particular story. I would say on a macro level to others, because it's obviously a common question and topic that I speak to and I get all the time about just breaking into the industry. How do I get a job with a team or this and this and this? There's no, secret answer that I'm going to have that like nobody's ever heard before. It's not like I have a hidden gem that nobody's ever heard of. What I will say is as you get older, as you and I have recently, you tend to notice that like these cliches are true, and that's why they're cliches, right? And so it is really about hard work. It is really about networking. It is really about who you know. It is really about, are you willing to put in the time at, maybe a a lesser compensation when you first start off in hours. I mean, you hear on the operations side all the time about GMs and coaches who started off in the film room, or they were interns and they slept on the couch. And in no way am I advocating or saying that's a must or saying people need to do that. But I think an element of, quote unquote, paying your dues and putting in your time, whether it's specifically in the sports industry or prior to joining the sports industry, is almost required, because again, so many people want that role. So I know when we put up a role, and when I put up a role for a team I'm, overseeing at the time, no matter what the role is, there are hundreds and hundreds of applicants within a matter of days. So it's in very high demand, and so many people have the love of basketball, or they're from Cleveland and they have the passion of sports. So there's a lot of people that have that, and that's great. So you really need to go beyond that, and going beyond that is, those aspects I was mentioning, which is like, do you have experience that other people don't have? Have you accomplished things have you been to places? Do you know people? Have you studied things? Just, again, really differentiating yourself, which you could apply that to any industry, right? We could be talking about tech or telco or whatever, but in the sports world, it's an absolute must, because, the demand for the positions is extremely high.
So let's assume I had no background in sports. Could I be an asset to the Cleveland Cavaliers in that sense? Maybe I've really established certain skill sets, but it has nothing to do with the Cavs. Do you see people like that transitioning into the Cavs? And if so, like, what are those transferable skill sets that you're seeing?
100%. In no way do you have to have worked for a sports team or in sports prior to joining sports team or working in sports. I use analogies all the time, right? But they work for the means of communication, which is, if you think of our organization like a big tree, there are so many branches on our tree, right? There's marketing, there's legal, there's finance, there's procurement, there's our hockey, there's minor league basketball, there's 12, 15, I couldn't even tell you how many, quote unquote, branches of the tree. And that's not meant to say that, teams don't interact and work well with one another, because of course we all work together. But the point is, if you are an amazing salesperson and you have a great sales track record, we have a corporate partnerships team, we have a ticket sales team, we have a foundation team, we have a membership, we have multiple teams whose core function in a professional manner is sales, right? If you have worked in nonprofit or CR your whole life, we have a foundation, we have a community relations team whose sole focus is that, right? If you've worked in logistics for your entire career, we have a procurement team. That's all they do is sourcing and procurement for, you can imagine the type of logistics that go into an arena and for professional sports. So yeah, the list goes on and on. Absolutely. We look, I know I can speak for our organization. We always look for the best possible candidate, and in no way is it a prerequisite that you have to have worked in sports prior.
Interesting. And what does like a training enablement look like of an individual coming in? Like, let's say I've never picked up a basketball. I've, barely heard of the Cavs for some reason, which obviously would be a total anomaly, but I bring a certain skill set to the organization. Right. Is a lot of it going to be learning about the Cavs, learning about the game of basketball? That obviously would make me stronger, taking, ticket sales as an example.
Right. Well, look, I think that there would be a base level of knowledge we would hope, anyone in the organization would obtain. Of course, we wouldn't want anyone to represent our organization and be out in a conversation in public and not know, who Darius Garland or Evan Mobley is, or, that the Cavs are in the Eastern Conference. So, there's a base level there. Of course, we don't issue a quiz. There's no test on a monthly basis to check, if everyone's field goal percentage. But look, what I would say is it kind of depends on the branch of the tree, right? If you want to be an assistant coach, that's one end of the spectrum. You got to know everything about basketball. But, there are roles in the organization where, yeah, you don't have to know everything. But I will say, I'll caveat that with, if I tie this back to how many, people want to work in sports and how many people are interested in organization, if you're that candidate and we find an equal candidate who, by the way, is extremely passionate about the team and the city and the region, et cetera, obviously that's going to set them apart. So we always would strive to fill our organization with people who are passionate about the team, but not to exclude a better candidate. So we'll always go with the better candidate. But if a tie goes to the runner type of deal, that's where the passion would come in, I would say.
Okay, great. Well, what is it? What does it look like working for the Cavs? I was at a concert recently, and I met one of the band managers, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, this would be amazing, right? You get to see these bands and meet all these other bands, and we were able to meet him for about 5 minutes because he was a friend of a friend, and he was in the middle of. I mean, he just looked like he was on a full sprint, and I'm like, does this guy even get to watch a concert ever, or is he just behind the scenes making everything work? So, what's it like?
Right.
Actually work for the Cavs and be in a professional sports organization? Are you in the locker rooms? Are you meeting the players, or are you doing your job behind the scenes to make sure everything is functioning the way as
Yeah, no, I would say, this is going to sound almost like a cop-out answer, but, if we have however many hundreds of people in the organization, you will get a different answer from all of them because every single role is different. For example, we have a great guy, Adam Hines, who leads our game operations, right? So Adam's clearly at every single game. He's there early. He's there late. He's the guy with the headset on at, mid-court, running the show for the game. A game day and a game night for him is obviously vastly different than, somebody else, say, who's in ticket sales or somebody who's in procurement. There are many individuals who don't have game day or game night responsibilities, who don't necessarily need to be in the arena at all. Obviously, many team members, stay to help, they stay to volunteer, they stay to watch the game, themselves as fans. But there's just such a disparity, I would say, in that. And that's, one other thing that people often forget about the sports industry is the difference between season and off season, right? If you work at, insert tech telco company or insert logistics company, by and large, your year is, the same, other than, some holiday time or, quarterly earnings or, things of that nature. But when you look at professional sports, there's a huge difference between the season and the off season. And so that's something that, has to be thought of. And people have to, be wary of as well. Hours change, days change. There's a lot of change that goes into that.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's I'm sure I could talk to you all day about all those different things. As you look to, you've hired for your team, you hire individuals, you have multiple people underneath you. What skills do you see really transfer? Like, what industries do you tap into? Are you looking for somebody maybe outside that comes from Nintendo as an example, or Microsoft with an Xbox background? Where do you see, and where do you see people that aren't part of the industry that would be talent for you to attract?
Yeah, I've never, on behalf of the organization, I don't think we would ever want to call out or exclude any particular company or any particular sector or anything like that. So for us, it's not as much about the most recent place you worked per se. It's not like, oh, we only want to hire people who worked at, these 20 companies or this and that. It'd be, of course, all entities want to see high profile candidates with great experience at very well-known brands. But look, if you are in marketing and you have your owned and operated marketing company that you've been running yourself for a couple of years, and you've grown it and you've done great creative work and you've won awards locally, versus, coming from, a Wheeldon and Kennedy or, an OMD in New York, and you've been part of this huge agency with hundreds of people, two different ends of the spectrum, but either end can produce the better candidate for us. And so we don't look at either end of the spectrum specifically. I mean, we always try to find the best candidate, period. And for us, the best candidate, if we had to boil it down to, okay, well, what makes the best candidate for the organization then, right? Like I mentioned, that passion for the organization, that passion for the team, that passion, we want people who have, the wine and gold and have it in their blood, because it's going to produce better work. And the sports industry is a unique industry in that regard because it taps into people's love and passion, similar to, say, music or food or art. Sports is a touch point. It's one of people's, loves throughout their lives. So it's very unique to us in that regard. So if we can tap into that, we get the best out of candidates. And so, if we can find the most skilled candidates who bring the biggest passion and this hardest work ethic, that's it. That's all we can hope for. And we're lucky that we have a lot of people who fit that bill.
Interesting. Okay. So you really look everywhere. There's nothing holding anybody back. I like that you said, an individual who owned their own marketing firm, And I've spoken with a number of executives in the past on my podcast here. And it's really interesting because they're like, hire for the skill sets, don't hire for the role. You need the skill sets to do the role, not the previous title to match your current title.
And I will say over the past 5 years or so, especially since a gentleman, Kevin Clayton, who leads our social impact and DE&I work, has come to the fold, a Cleveland native as well. We've completely led the charge in terms of making sure that those who walk the halls of our office represent the city, right? And that we have a makeup, and that doesn't necessarily have to mean X% white or black or Asian or Latino. Yes, there's an element of that, but just diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of belief. We have people in our organization from Ivy League schools. We have people with their GED, right? And so we really, treat everybody equal once they step foot in the door. And if you're the best person for the job, you're the best person for the job. That's the way we see it.
That's great. Okay. Refreshing to hear. Most exciting thing about working for a professional team. What do you love doing there the most? Man.
Well, I mean, obviously I'm biased. I'm a Cleveland native, so it hits different, for me in that regard. But it's just, it never gets old. The little things never get old, and that sounds corny, but if I'm leaving work one day and say there's a music concert, because keep in mind, I spoke to our 4 teams, but Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, in and of itself, which we own and operate, has 200 plus events a year. So one night it's a Cavs game, and I leave after the game, and I come in the next day, and there's an ice rink down for a Monsters hockey game that night. And then I leave work and I come back, and the next morning there's a stage being built for a Lizzo concert. And that, every day it's a new thing. I mean, we have 200 plus events per year, 200 plus in our building alone. So, we're a top 15 rated arena within North America. So for me, it's just I'll be walking out of work and there's a line of cars coming into my garage for people to come to the Harry Styles concert, and they're blasting the music and they're just excited for their night on a Tuesday. And I'm just going home on a Tuesday, and so that stuff doesn't get old. And, we're neighbors with the Guardians, of course. And when their season's rocking and rolling over the summer, and the vibe around downtown, as a Cleveland guy. So for me, the atmosphere, it's not just an office. Not that there's anything wrong with a standard office, of course, but I'm lucky in that it's exciting for me that I don't just work in a standard setting.
No, that's great. So how many games do you think you'll get to in a year? Is it just the Cavs game?
Ooh, that depends. I would say, again, I go back to it depends on the person and their role, et cetera. So for me personally, you could probably put it at 25 to 33%, somewhere in that line. And then as the year picks up in the back half of the year, I'll probably go to all the games in the last month, and then of course all the playoff games. So I try to take a little break there during the holiday time, especially because if you go to a game, that pretty much can mean you don't see the family that entire day or night, and so I'll pick and choose around the holiday season. But come second half of the year, I don't want to be missing too many games. That's when it gets really, really exciting.
Okay. Oh, well, this is great. I can't thank you enough for joining, Jonathan. Very insightful. Great to hear from my listeners. For anyone out there, a lot of opportunity to join these organizations. If you bring the passion with you, it looks like it doesn't matter your background, which is extremely exciting. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Take care.